Invincible Season 4 has wrapped up with an unexpectedly low-key finale, but not one without some of the gravest ramifications of any season finale thus far. And honestly, after some of the biggest and craziest episodes the series has ever seen, I really appreciated this slower, more reflective episode, one that really starts to force Mark to unpack and deal with the immense amounts of trauma he's experienced over the past couple years. And while this thing didn't have the insane action we've come to expect from an Invincible finale, one scene in particular had me about as close to the edge of my seat as humanly possible without falling off. There is plenty to dig into with this finale, so let's talk Invincible Season 4, Episode 8's aptly titled, Don't Leave Me Hanging Here. Obviously, we're at the end of the season now, but just the briefest reminder, I'm not spoiling ahead for myself with the comics, much like many other fans of the show, so please just keep that in mind when commenting and avoid spoiling for those folks as well. Thanks so much. Okay, so with last week leaving off with a, oh shit, the Viltrumites are headed for Earth cliffhanger, this one basically begins with what we all expected to be the outcome of that episode. An all-out Viltrumite assault on Earth, creating tsunamis, massacring humanity, full-on doom. Honestly, despite his major showing last week that really made us understand how powerful the guy is, I think this opening features the most imposing and scary visualization of Thrag so far, just silently leading the Viltrumites in their assault, looking down on a doomed planet. His final descent from the ship was ominous. But I think the genius of this sequence is that when it ends, it is not clear if we saw something that actually happened or if it's in Mark's head. It's clearly intending for you to think that it was happening. Hence the wildly suspenseful few minutes after this, where you just think that every additional moment it takes them to get to Earth is one moment closer to complete destruction. And with this expectation, the sequences where they're just hopelessly waiting to arrive at Earth are painful. I also love Tech Jacket sort of being the audience surrogate here, just asking, so what are we gonna do when we get there? What the hell is the plan, actually? And obviously, there isn't really a plan. They are desperate, but if the planet was being assaulted by the remaining Viltrumites, there wouldn't be a ton of hope without some major additions to their defenses. But the actual return to Earth is where the episode completely subverts expectations the first time, both within the narrative and from what we've come to expect from Invincible finales. I liked the way that when Mark initially enters Earth's atmosphere and starts searching for signs of conflict, it initially almost looks as though there's no human activity of any kind. Makes you wonder if the humans have already been wiped out. But as he gets closer, he sees that things are actually just kind of business as usual. Pretty well executed, suspenseful sequence, but also one that really had me scratching my head, honestly. I really didn't read that initial sequence with the Viltrumites as something that could have been imagined until my second viewing, and it really put me on edge for that first part of the episode. And then being on edge was exacerbated by all of these PTSD fake-outs from Mark. Now, I feel a few things about these bloody, violent hallucinations. For one, I get that maybe they wanted to add a bit more action into a sort of low-key finale, and I think that was relatively successful. I just felt like the number of fake-outs got a little bit tiresome, but it also did serve a purpose, given the fake-out at the end, but we'll get there. But most importantly, I love how these serve Mark's journey, because we have obviously been reconciling with Mark's trauma for a few seasons in a row now, and it's actually sort of relieving to see that trauma finally catch up with him in a way that will force him to actually get the help he needs. I mean, I think you can see exactly how much Mark is struggling purely based on the fact that he seems to have completely forgotten his beef with Cecil. He's basically answering to him like it's season 1 or 2, though obviously Mark recognizing the grave nature of their current predicament is a big factor here. He more or less feels like he just lit a fuse and they're just waiting for the bomb to explode. Okay, before we get to Mark and Eve, let's talk about the big Nolan and Debbie developments. Again, one of the highlights of not just the episode, but the entire season. Nolan and Debbie's reunion in episode 5 was possibly my favorite scene in the season and one of my favorite scenes in the series. Just one of those scenes where Nolan had to reconcile firsthand with the crater he left in the lives of his family, and Debbie's chance to say everything he deserved to hear. And while I do really like a lot of what's going on with Nolan and Debbie here, and a lot of the specifics of where it's heading narratively, I do think in some moments they are struggling to walk a delicate line here. First, I love that Debbie immediately comes at Nolan with like divorced parent energy, furious that he let Oliver get hurt in their battle over Viltrum. It's like that superhero escalation of when the dad drops off the 5-year-old at mom's house, hopped up on sugar. The energy I really like seeing between them right now. We also get one of the best line deliveries of the season, once again from Sandra Oh's Debbie, after Nolan says that he is trying.
You are. You are very fucking trying right now.
But the place here where I think Nolan really makes the correct move is that he simply starts talking about Oliver and Mark like a proud father, telling Debbie the things she would have been proud to see, the fact that they selflessly and heroically faced unimaginable danger to protect the lives of people they would never even meet. This is the exact approach Nolan needs to be taking, because in my opinion, his way to some form of redemption is through fatherhood. Not a hope to be accepted or forgiven for his crimes, but to fit into a selfless role for his children, for their sake. And it does seem like this momentarily gets through to Debbie. I am much less of a fan of how Nolan approaches the conversation after this. Super speeding in front of Debbie to stop her from leaving? My dude, that is absolutely way too aggressive given what you've put everybody through. I get that Nolan is truly desperate to make up for his mistakes and that he is genuinely using what is left of his life to fight against the force that he was previously representing, that he is trying to be a real dad to Oliver and Mark, but needing Debbie to acknowledge this, to me, says that he isn't purely doing it for the right reasons, that he is looking for credit and genuinely hopes that he can reconcile with her. I just don't think he comes off well in this moment after a season of largely taking the right approach to his newfound morality shift. I also felt a bit odd about some of his dialogue in trying to win Debbie back over, claiming she believes in rehabilitation. And look, this does read to me as something that makes sense within Debbie's characterization, but Nolan leaning into it when it's not something we've ever actually seen within the text of the show reads strangely to me. It really reads like the writers are sort of trying to retroactively fit in further reasoning that Debbie might come to forgive Nolan. And if we had maybe seen Debbie verbalize anything like this back in seasons 1 or 2, it certainly would have felt a lot more effective. Again, not an idea I hate. Rehab and second chances feel like something Debbie would be in support of from the outside looking in, and then maybe struggle to reconcile those beliefs when it got personal. I just wish there had been any real lead up here. It could have hit really effectively. Regardless, it does seem like he gets through to Debbie a bit here within the text of the episode. I think the more effective Nolan conversation in this episode is actually with Cecil. I love the idea that Nolan returns to the scene of the season 1 climax, the moment where everything changed, when he realized that he had changed and had now gone too far. Nolan going here alone is again, I think, a pretty good indicator that he is deeply reflecting on these turning points in his life. And regardless whether or not he can make up for his mistakes, which is something I struggle to think he can do, this season has shown time and time again that his attempts to be better are genuine. This scene is also probably Cecil's best sequence all season. I particularly loved his delivery after Nolan says he doesn't have to be afraid of him, only for him to say, "I will never not be afraid of you." I mean, the balls on Cecil here. First, he tells the guy he'll always fear him, but then immediately tells Nolan that he better be ready to defend the hell out of Earth when the time comes, but also get the hell off the planet until that time comes. It's a great reunion scene. Cecil reads Nolan pretty damn effectively, both recognizing that he is clearly trying to make good, but also it gives him an opportunity to tell him off. I'm really curious if we'll get more between Cecil and Nolan, because this is a relationship that I think could be really interesting moving forward, given Cecil's history of utilizing rehabbed criminals for the greater good. Seems like, despite Cecil's claims of eternal fear towards Nolan, that this might be the one Nolan relationship that could go back to relative normativity. Though the highlight here for me has gotta be this final exchange. Nolan claiming he risked his life and nearly died, and Cecil telling him to try nearly dying 2,341 more times. This was the number of people killed in the destruction of Chicago at the end of season 1. Absolutely biting line, made even more impactful by the series of expressions from Nolan right afterwards. First, resolute frustration, followed by realization, followed by shame and guilt. Really liked that they lingered on Nolan for the slow revelation. Okay, let's go back to Mark and Eve, another huge part of this episode. I've been vocal about being a little disappointed in Eve being sidelined this year, so I'm hopeful that she's got a bigger season ahead, but their reunion was effectively emotional. First, there's the obvious change here. Eve is a little thick now. Honestly, this feels like actually an effective development, because at first it makes you wonder if she went through with the pregnancy, but it leads into the revelation that this was a result of the stress and depression that came alongside her impossibly painful circumstance. And I think that is why this scene plays so well. It's treated with the proper weight for the character. Eve was already unsure about whether or not she wanted to keep the baby, but Mark was gone so long, Eve genuinely had no idea if he'd ever be returning. anything, if he was even alive. That unknown forced her to make her decision as though the worst case were true, as though he might never come back, with the knowledge that she'd become a single mother at such a young age to likely a superpowered child and probably become further dependent on her parents' support, including her very shitty father. And given how resentful that man is of all metahumans in general, I cannot imagine he'd be treating that kid well. Obviously, Eve may have chosen to get rid of the baby regardless, but the tragedy here is that the superheroic nature of her and Mark's intertwined lives removed any of the stability she may have had otherwise. It forced her to make that decision rooted in unknown variables, and those unknown variables are surrounding the possibility that her boyfriend and that the father of her potential child could be dead. Just impossibly hard to imagine, and I think Eve's emotions here are properly rooted in that traumatic circumstance. And I think Mark's spiral after this fact is also pretty effective because he is just further understanding the complexities that come with their lives as heroes. It's further extrapolating on that conversation in the season premiere with Eve's father about whether or not Mark being in Eve's life at all is just putting her in more danger. Mark is looking at how this played out and recognizing that if he and Eve were not together, she would not have had to go through this alone. He feels like he failed as a partner because his obligations took him across the universe, and combined with the fact that he knows he not only nearly died, but probably should have died at the hands of Thrag, it forces him to face the reality that Eve's fears were fully justified. I love that this is basically introed as though it's going to be a breakup scene. Mark at his breaking point, realizing he can't be the partner he wants to be for Eve, but it is ultimately a great showcase of Eve's mindset and resolve. One that should help silence not just Mark's doubts in the circumstance, but also the ones that Eve's dad vocalized earlier in the season. Eve knows the deal. She understands the danger and unknown that comes with their life together, that comes with their superhero life. She maybe knows more than anyone, given that her ex-boyfriend was recently killed by an alternate universe version of her current boyfriend. Sheesh, Eve's life is pretty brutal when you really look at it. But I appreciated this reaffirmation of their relationship, and also that there's maybe just a bit more drama and uncertainty thrown in there for Mark. The idea that he maybe blames himself for the danger that comes Eve's way could spice up the dynamics in a way that I think the show might need. I really like Mark and Eve, but it sometimes feels like there isn't quite enough shaking them up in the story/drama department. This specific story, I think, was effective in that way, though it would have been maybe a little more effective if we had gotten to see a bit more from Eve's perspective. But this was probably the most I've cared about Mark and Eve as a couple in a while. Okay, let's go back to Debbie, and honestly, I gotta say, I was genuinely surprised by the revelation that she and Paul had broken up while Mark was in space. Not that it didn't make sense, but with the time they sunk into them as a couple, I genuinely just really liked Debbie with a down-to-earth, normal-ass dude. Plus, he made killer spaghetti. Oliver is gonna be so bummed. But I thought the execution of this reveal worked well, because obviously this conversation is playing out as though they're still together. It's a bit of a rug pull for the audience, and also a great indicator that they didn't end on bad terms, with Debbie still going to Paul to vent about Nolan. And honestly, what a good dude. It's gotta be weird to have to lend an ear to your ex as she vents about her ex, who also happens to have done like a whole 9/11 a few years back. But I genuinely appreciated that Paul was the one who basically puts the idea in Debbie's head that she should just go see Oliver. Obviously something she hadn't even considered, but he's right. She has the means. She can go see her son. It's a good moment. You can never make me hate Paul or his spaghetti. But Debbie's approach in going to space I enjoyed even more, just full-on demanding that Nolan takes her with. Debbie's pissed off face is one of my favorites in the show, and she just doesn't let it down for even a moment in this sequence. Nolan looking like a scared puppy trying to tell her he's gonna have to fly her up there, it was great. He's looking at her like that one Brendan Fraser whale photo. Honestly, I love Debbie. I still want to do a character video on her. It's hard to even wrap my head around everything she's had to endure between the Nolan revelation and being the mom to two constantly endangered superhero boys. She was genuinely so calm for somebody about to embark on her first ever intergalactic space trip, but I guess when you're worried your children might be dead for multiple months, just about anything is like a cakewalk. I admittedly really liked the moment on the ship where Nolan showed Debbie the view of Earth, mostly just as a showcase of Nolan's longing for the life he gave up. But let's talk about what it feels like they're setting up here. Because obviously, it seems like they're aiming for a Nolan/Debbie reconciliation, and I think I am going to have a hard time swallowing that pill. I feel like I am okay with a lot in terms of recognizing the change in Nolan, but I think it's going to take a lot more for me to be okay with a genuine reconnection between them as a couple. Like, more than I can even imagine. I will say, I love the prospect of Debbie, Nolan, and Oliver all being together, especially now that Oliver has a real relationship with Nolan. He'll basically be the bridge between two very divorced parents. There's a ton of opportunity there. Hell, send the three of them on a space road trip. That'll really test their limits and dynamics. But I really don't want Debbie and Nolan back together. I would maybe be okay with some semblance of forgiveness aimed at Nolan from Debbie, like in the event of or leading up to his death. It feels like some sort of self-sacrifice is inevitable for Nolan somewhere down the line, but full reconciliation, it feels unrealistic to me, and I don't think audiences would be too stoked on it. All right, let's get to the end of the episode, which is honestly a highlight scene of the entire series pretty easily. In his depressed post-Thrag days, Eve suggests Mark go for a fly, which honestly, great advice. If you're ever depressed, go for a run in the park. Feels great. And after a nice little flying montage set to Death Cab for Cutie, there he is. After an entire episode of both Mark and the audience expecting some violent Viltrumite interruption, it isn't until the last scene that Thrag shows his face, and not to fight, to talk. This is, without a doubt, the best Thrag scene in the show. This shows not just his calculated approach, but his vindictive nature. While I did expect that Thrag and co were going to use Earth as a breeding ground to shore up the Viltrumite numbers, I did not expect the way they would go about it. And honestly, it is an ingenious rug pull. Basically just infiltrating their ranks secretly, blending in, pretending to be humans, and procreating. Of course, this is the way they're gonna do it. They are desperate, and they shouldn't be drawing attention to themselves, but also they still have the numbers to be formidable and threatening. But it's not just this plan being such a brilliant subversion of expectations, it's this conversation being the most painful imaginable payback. Because here's the thing, this plan would have absolutely still worked if they had just gone about it in secret. This conversation with Mark, Thrag's ultimatum, it wasn't about securing permission or preventing pushback. It was payback. It was psychological torture. Thrag knows that they have the upper hand. He knows there is absolutely nothing Mark can do to stop them, and he's only confronting Mark here because he wants him to know it too. There is only one answer here. It's literally, let us infiltrate your planet from within, or I will drop a proverbial nuke. And after an entire episode of Mark imagining and fearing all of the ways the Viltrumites will kill each and every one of his loved ones, after going through that painful realization that he wasn't there for Eve when she needed him most, there is simply no way Mark can reject Thrag's offer here. And man, do they play the emotional expression well. Absolutely every instinct, every single feeling Mark has is to tell Thrag absolutely the fuck not. But he knows that he can't do that. He knows this is the only move at this point. Thrag presents this as a choice, but it is not a choice. He's just laying his cards on the table, winning the hand, and taking the pot. Full on edge of my seat suspense right here. This genuinely had me losing my mind more than most of the insane action sequences in the series. Just one of the best moments the show has pulled off by far. Truly a magic trick that a simple conversation can put my stomach in my throat like that. Number one on Thrag's greatest hits for sure. And of course, we've also got that revelation in the post-credit scene that Alan is now solely responsible for Scourge 2.0. So that's exciting. The Alan stuff in this episode did feel like it messed with the pacing a little bit. It was hard to take seriously him worrying about his big speech while we thought Earth was being attacked by Viltrumites, but it is a fascinating development. Alan taking on this all-important role and both feeling a little inadequate and like he's being questioned by the rest of the coalition. It for sure makes me worry about exactly how or why he will make the decision to use the Scourge virus. Not to mention the new information that Scourge may not just affect Viltrumites, but could affect humans as well. Finally, putting an end to Viltrum could include genociding humanity as a byproduct, made even more difficult by the fact that the Viltrumites are actively infiltrating and breeding on Earth. Might become a full-on incubation tank for the next generation of Viltrumites. Do they just have to use Scourge? What else can we do? This development really has me more excited than ever for the future future of the show, there's just so much suspense built into this premise. There's a ticking clock attached to the fact that the longer the Viltrumites aren't dealt with, the more they can shore up their numbers. And then there's also just like 37 Viltrumite-shaped proximity mines scattered around Earth. Mark's anxiety is rightfully going to be absolutely out of control next season, as is mine. Obviously, it feels like Mark will have to inform Cecil about this, and they're going to have to somehow quietly bolster their defenses, but man, they are spread thin. Basically, Earth has Mark, Eve, Tech Jacket, the Guardians, and Invincible Reaniman. Machine Head's order of mobsters might be mildly helpful. Anything else? I expect at some point Robot and Monster Girl will return, and I anticipate that they may have taken control of some of the Flaxen tech, hopefully including those mechs that were built to fight Nolan. Those could go a long way. Maybe Immortal and Kate could return to help, but damn does it feel pretty hopeless, which I guess at this point is the show's MO, always making things feel hopeless. And it all kind of points to Scourge 2.0, doesn't it? And it seems like there were already hints that the Scourge will come into play. Back in season 3, when Invincible visited Immortal's future, he hinted that Mark had been sick, which obviously now feels to clearly be a Scourge indicator. Now, I expect that some people just probably didn't love this finale as much as the last few episodes because it really slowed things down after such intense action. But I really thought this was an outstanding move and an outstanding episode. Create an overwhelming sense of dread and then deliver on that sense of dread in a subversive way. Not to mention that the show really did just need a moment to breathe after going nonstop for a few episodes. Overall, I thought season 4 was mostly very strong. I obviously have a couple issues or reservations about specific aspects of the narrative and season, but overall, it's delivering outstanding episodes far more often than not. Honestly, episodes 5 through 8 were all pretty outstanding, and often for entirely different reasons than one another. Episode 5 stands as my favorite of the season, one of my favorites of the series, and though this finale wasn't as explosive, I cannot pretend like the Thrag Ultimatum wasn't one of the greatest moments in the entire show. I think I may give season 3 the slight edge over 4. Season 4 may have felt more cohesive, but season 3's individual stories were mostly so outstanding also. Even the side quests like Future Immortal and Powerplex were just such poignant and emotional episodes, but I can't pretend like season 4 was a big step down or anything because it was also mostly fantastic. Every season, I'm left beyond excited with what we're going to see the next year, and often without any true idea of what to expect. That's true again here. Hey, if you enjoyed this breakdown and want to see my reaction to the episode, check out my other channel, Johnny2Casual. I've cut down reactions to both episodes 7 and 8 up there now. And if you enjoyed my coverage of the season as a whole, please consider subscribing. I'm obviously going to cover more Invincible in the future, but you might also like my Spider-Man videos, and I'm planning on covering both Spider Noir and Brand New Day later in the year. Please let me know in the comments what you guys thought of not just the finale, but the season as a whole. Did you enjoy it as much as I did? Thanks for sticking with me all season, and stay tuned for more. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.